Hey everyone, um, depending on whether or not you followed API Basics Part 1 or 2 or not, um, this might be coming in from two different contexts, but this is supposed to be a video for people who might not have seen the first two parts in which we were setting up the infrastructure for the retrofit, but nonetheless will be able to use it. And so you're not expected to set up the infrastructure yourself. If you did, wonderful, you learned a lot. If you didn't, that's absolutely fine. We'll be learning how to do that from scratch, and we'll be also learning how to make fresh API calls. And I'm just going to get started because if it's your first video, it's going to take quite a bit while for Gradle to compile. So this is my GitHub page for 309 code references. I'm just going to download the zip for this, and this is precisely what you'll see. And when you download, you can just copy it. And so I'm just going to go through each and every step that you'll be going through. So I'm just going to paste it in some random folder so I can see if there's any error that comes along. So here we have, and so I'm going to open Android Studio, and so this is going to take a while. So while this happens, I'm just going to go over the rest of the goals and pretty much the structure of how the rest of the video is going to be. And if you've already followed through in the first two parts, this is going to be quite repetitive. So I'm just going to give a fair warning about that. But we will be covering something new, including how to pass parameters data into the API call. So this is going to be a somewhat interesting part. So I'm just looking for my file, it's in random, and there we go. So I'm just going to let the Gradle compile, and this obviously is an error that I think everybody is likely to get: invalid VCS root mapping. That's just because the folder in which I put it in and it's registered to be in that folder for Git is not the folder that you might see it in. So okay, we're doing okay in time. So this is fine. This is something we can figure out later on how to fix. Introducing retrofit. Okay, so let's get started. So the first thing is, to make an API call, your code needs to understand what sort of data we'll be getting. So Retrofit is very type strict sort of a language, which basically means that we will be creating everything in a very modular fashion, very reusable fashion, which is really nice in terms of architecture. But you do also need to describe each and every class we'll be communicating. And okay, so again, for people who haven't followed through, what we usually use to test our API calls is this website called jsonplaceholder.typicode. And in this one, in the first two ones, I used API posts data type. In this one, I'm going to be using photos. So photos 1 will fetch us this JSON. If I do photos 2, I'll get this. If I do photos 3, I'll get this. And so I'm just going to try to use the photos, and in photos you see that this is the JSON object we're getting. So somehow I'll be trying to replicate this this object type in my project. Let's see. Okay, so the project is working fine. I'm just going to configure the root. This is fine. I'm just going to delete it. Yep, that's fine. Okay. So this is where all our API stuff will be at, and as you can see, this is really the post API. This is the interface. And in the models you see post, this is the data type. So I think it'll be better for you guys to understand as we go along. how API clients are created in this structure. We'll also be learning how to use the Lambda function. So in the second in the second API basics, we created the basic Lambda functions and interfaces to use Lambda functions to do our logic, which makes it really easy to do quite complex logic. And we'll also be learning how to deal with arrays and getting inputs from users. So okay, let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is define the data type. So we're going to create a new class and we're going to call it photo. And how will this photo look like? Well, we have some idea, so I'm just going to copy this because I have bad memory, and I'm just going to make all the variables private, album ID, private int ID, private string title, private string URL, private string and thumbnail URL. Okay, so that's it. This is all we get from photo data type, and over here I'm going to go to generate, and I'm going to go to getters and setters, and I'm going to get getters and setters for all of them. I also want to, just in case, have a default constructor, so I'm going to go to generate and constructor and just have a default constructor, this open thing. So there we go. Now we have the data type photo. Next thing we're going to do is, just like the post API, we're going to create an interface which we're going to call photo API. And if you look at post API, it's actually going to look really similar. We can actually copy the logic inside this, and that's why you have the post API, so that you can use that as a reference and paste this. So the first thing about this code is, in the API client factory, we're using JSON placeholder as the base URL. If you want to use something else, for instance, when you'll be connecting your projects from your own local host, you would want to replace this, right? Or if you want to be using some other website to be making your API calls, you would want to replace your base URL. This is fine for our purpose because I use the same base URL to make my post API calls, and so this will work fine because I've been using the same JSON placeholder typical library. So the only difference is that if you see the rest of the portion, it actually looks somewhat different, because instead of posts over here you have photos. So everything that comes after the typico.com / is something that goes inside those mappings. So in our case, we'll have photos /1. So this is what we want. And you just leave the whole thing, paste this, and okay. And the call is a wrapper around whatever data type you want to get. So in this case, we do have the data type. It's called photo, and it immediately recognizes that, it's there in the model. I'm just going to get rid of this, and instead of get first post, I say get first photo, and that's it. This is how you'll get the first photo. But in this video, I want to figure out some rather more complex logic. So we're going to also be learning how to deal with arrays and getting user input. So dealing with arrays is very, very simple. So in this case, let's say instead of /1, I just write photos. I'll get this list of I don't know, I think maybe 1,000, maybe more than 1,000, 5,000 photos. So this is an array or list. And so how do we get this? Well, it's exactly the same. but instead of creating a wrapper of call around photo, we create it around a list of photo. And we hover over it and it tells us to import class. This is really nice. And get all photos. And that's it. This is how we get the array. And of course you can change the mapping from get to set or post, but those mappings are only usually helpful when you're giving some sort of a data back. And so how do we give some data back? Well, for that you can actually look at the Retrofit documentation. They've beautifully explained the whole thing. So there's something called a path, which you can pass, use to pass stuff within the URL. There is something called the body, which for instance, if you want to send back photos, we can use body. And there's also query. There's a number of them. Since for the purpose of this thing, if you see very carefully, if you write /1, you get the first photo. If you do /2, you get the second one. So for us, we can actually place this thing, this string, this number at the end of or within the path, and so this will be fine for us. So we'll be using a path parameter, but you can use whatever you want. And so I'm going to just the same thing, photo, /photo num, whatever the number is, and I'm going to wrap it around call and tell it that the data type is photo, and get photo by num. And I mean, in this case, it really doesn't matter if it's a number or a string, so I'm just going to pass it as string, so I don't have to do any unnecessary conversion. Add path, so Retrofit already has this thing, and inside this, I'm going to describe that it's photo num, and its type is string, and and then that's it. So there we go. We have just successfully passed parameter inside our API call, and so you can pass a body, you can pass just about anything. Okay, but how do we get this interface working? Because this is not an API client, it's just an interface. Well, that's fairly easy. You go to the API client factory, and this is something every time you create a new interface you'll have to do. And we can just use the get post API, this client, as a model. Just copy the whole thing and paste it, and just instead of post API, you write photo API, and instead of get post API, we can rename it to get photo API, and instead of returning get API client c.create, you write post API.class, we write photo API.class. So that's it. Now we have a client, right? And that's all we really needed. If you go to the main activity, I'm just going to get rid of this and kind of start from scratch. If we look at the res files and the layout, we see that we really just have one text box. And so for the purpose of our purpose of showing how these API calls are made, this is going to be sufficient for the time being. So I'm going to be reusing the API text one a lot. Okay, let's make the first API call. So the first API call is going to, so this is how we make it. So get post API, so we have a client dot get first post dot enqueue, and we're going to use a slim callback. So this is something I created to just use Lambda functions, and inside that we're going to tell it that accidentally got post API. Get photo API dot get first photo dot enqueue and new slim callback, and so the data type for this is photo, and just hover over it and import the class. Oh, it's a conflict. Okay, that's fine. And okay, I'm going to do something just to make everything easier. I'm going to create within the photo class a function called printable, which will really decrease a lot of the logic that we'll need to get this working. So I'm going to try to get this to look something like this. So let's see how far we can get. Okay, next line, next line, next line, and this should probably be the last one. Oh, should probably do next line on this one too. Okay, so instead of writing this logic every time, I'm just going to create a small method inside the photo so that I don't have to do this. And let's do response photo, or just response. We can name it whatever we want to. And these curly brackets is where the logic is going to go. There isn't actually much logic to it. We can actually just print whatever we get. Printable. Okay. So we're just going to be using that text box that we had and just printing out the result from get first, which should look something like this. Okay, hopefully. And just run the emulator. It's going to take a little while. But yeah, this is how we set up the whole stack. Oh, something else. Right after the curly brackets, you can actually add a string to to um, to do troubleshooting. Um, so a lot of times API calls don't go through, and getting some useful message is really hard. And in the Lambda functions I created, you can actually pass a second parameter optionally, which you can use to kind of diagnose what problem you're having and kind of Google it. So makes it really useful. As you can see, this always takes quite a bit of time to run, especially if you're doing it for the very first time. After that, it gets relatively easy. Oh, some reason it's having a naming issue. I'm not precisely sure why this naming issue has kind of come about, because it wasn't there when I wrote this code previously. Yeah. But yeah, there we go. Built successfully and did it. It's installing it inside the emulator, and the next thing it's going to do is launch it. So there we go. You have everything. Oh, so okay. So just in case. Okay, there we go. Just got the photo. Just in case you guys are wondering what this is, this arrow, this is called a Lambda function. Essentially says that, whatever we get in response, this is the response. We want you to do something with it. So this is essentially what the Lambda function is saying. So whatever is inside the curly brackets. Okay, I'm just going to comment this out. I don't want to delete this code, so you guys can have a look at it for reference. But I want to actually show how the arrays work inside the same text box. So what I'm going to do is I am going to make this scrollable. Let's see, set movement method, new scrolling movement method. Yep, that's it. So now I just made the text box scrollable, which is nice. Now I'm going to get all the photo JSONs that we just saw. So get all photos .enq new slim callback, and inside that we say just photos or just photos, and we're going to add in a debug message, which will be multiple not precisely sure where this window came from. How do I get rid of this? Okay. multiple photos API. Okay, so this is a custom tag, and inside this I'm going to say, well, for int I is equals to 0, I less than photos dot size I plus plus. So we're just going to iterate over all the data that we've gotten and just print it all out. So how do we do that? First we empty the text box out, and next we append it with all the photos. And photos dot get. So in case you guys have used linked list, this is how this would work. And to printable. There we go. So in case something goes wrong, we can actually look up this tag and see how to get that working. Oh yeah, if you already have the process running, the app running, which we did, it'll ask you if you want to terminate it. So that's absolutely normal. And the next thing we're going to do is get some input from the user. And of course, for that, we're going to need some sort of an input box and some sort of a button for the user to tell us that, oh, do something with that. So having any trouble with it? Let's have a look. Multiple. Nope, nothing is logged. It should work. Oh, there we go. There we go. We have all 5,000 items inside this thing. Yep. And again, I'm just going to comment this out so you guys can have a look at it for reference, but it shouldn't be much of a thing. And let's go back to the layout, and I'm going to add a button and some input thing. So I think a plain text should work fine. Make it a little smaller. The number doesn't have to be that big, and we have to position it every time. So it's like probably the most important thing. And inside that, we're going to actually change its name to nothing. So we don't want this to be anything, but we do want to give a hint about what this thing is, so we can update that. Photo num. And we want to get the ID to something that is recognizable, so my rule is always prefix it with the name of the activity. In this case, it's going to be activity main. Photo num input refactor. That's always good. You want all the changes to be thorough. And the next thing we're going to add is a button. Very, very simple button, and it's going to say the button is going to say get photo by num, or just get photo. I think that should be sufficient. And we're going to name it, again, prefix it by the activity, so activity main button to for photo refactor. Okay, so now we have all these things. Now we're just going to go inside our main activity, and over here I'll have to get the reference for both of those items. So let's start with the button photo button is equals to find r.id.activity button. Okay, then and I just have to import the class for button. And the next thing is, so the other thing is called this thing is called an edit view, and you can sort of see it underneath the attribute. This is called an edit text, and so that's the type. Edit text photo num input is equals to find view by id r.id.activity photo input. Okay, there we go. Now we have the whole thing. All we need to do is create some sort of listener, so that every time we press a button, it checks what number is inside it and does the API call that we created before. So let's do that. So photo button dot set on click listener, and the input it's telling us is an on click listener, so we just write new on click listener, and it's asking us what it's supposed to do on click. So we say, well, get photo API dot get photo by num, and inside that we're going to get this thing photo num input. So let's do photo num input dot get text, and it's still angry at us, so we write dot to string and dot enqueue and new SlimCallback. Oh, small SlimCallback, and the type is photo. I've already created the data type and it's in the model, and we say photo and we say API text 1 dot set text photo dot printable. That's it. Done. And we run the emulator. It's probably going to take a little bit while. We're over 30 minutes, so I'm sorry for the time, but these things take their time. And terminate the app. I mean, it always needs to close the app before it can start making the changes and reinstalling it, so that makes sense. Okay, there we go. And if we want to enter photo num1 and get photo, there we go. First, let's do 555 get photo. Yep, ID 555, and let's do 399. Yep, so there we go. We're getting all the data, and we've learned how to pass data into a parameter, so now you can actually add, like, post and create new entries in your database. We've learned how to use lambdas in this case, and we've learned how to deal with arrays. This is probably going to be the last in the API basics. So glad you guys learned something. Same.